Good evening, everyone. My name is Mary Jo Kane, and among other things, I am the director of the Tucker Center for Research on Girls and Women in Sport. Before I begin my formal remarks, I want to thank you all for coming to tonight's event, and I also want to remind you that there will be a reception in the lobby right after Professor Gould finishes remarks and leads us in what I'm sure will be a very thought-provoking question and answer session. And also, if you haven't already done so, please check out the materials that we have outside in the lobby and sign up to get on our mailing list. One thing I always try to do at our distinguished lectures is to acknowledge how important the support is that we have received from the university since our inception in 1993. So there are some folks at the University of Minnesota that I want to acknowledge, and I would like you to hold your applause until each one of them is introduced and stands up. First, from the Office of the President, Lynn Holleran. From the Graduate School, Associate Dean Shirley Garner. Speaking of deans, the Dean of the College of Education and Human Development, Steve Usen, is somewhere in the crowd. And Regina Sullivan, although I haven't seen her yet, is the Senior Associate Athletic Director. Where is she? You see what happens when you get old. It's just too hard. So how about a round of applause for all those folks? And I also, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the members of the Tucker team for all the great work that they have done behind the scenes to get this event ready. Heather Maxwell, Nicole Lavoie, and last but never least, Jonathan Sweet. How about a round of applause for those folks? At our spring lecture every year, we have the great privilege to award 2 scholarships because of the amazing generosity of Van and Mike Mueller. The Muellers created a scholarship to honor the memory of their daughter Edith, who was a student majoring in Recreation, Park, and Leisure Studies when she passed away in 1982. Their wish was to permanently establish a fitting tribute to the vitality and the purposefulness of Edith's life. They therefore created the Edith Mueller Parks and Recreation Memorial Scholarship to encourage students majoring in recreation and park management to further their involvement in and deepen their commitment to this academic and professional area. I would like to acknowledge right now Van and Mike Mueller, who I know they're here. Where are you? Van and Mike, stand up and be acknowledged, please. Our award winners tonight certainly share the Muellers' vision and commitment. So I would like to ask the first award winner, Sarah Thorson, if you would come forward, please. Sarah Thorson is from Golden Valley, Minnesota, and she has worked as a gymnastics coach, a camp counselor, and a program assistant for children with autism. While earning her undergraduate degree with an emphasis in therapeutic recreation, Sarah has maintained an overall GPA of 3.6. She will use her scholarship while completing an internship this summer with the Special Recreation Department in Bend, Oregon. And next fall, she will take the National Council for Therapeutic Recreation certification exam to become a certified therapeutic recreation specialist. So Sarah, on behalf of the School of Kinesiology and Van and Mike Mueller, thank you and great award. And our second winner, if you want to come up, Aaron. Hey, Aaron. Our second award winner is Aaron Ravo Lynch from North Minneapolis, and Aaron has been both a benefactor of youth programming and a strong contributor to it in his own neighborhood. Aaron's emphasis area is public parks and recreation, and he has an overall GPA of 3.4. He will use his scholarship to help offset his tuition as he completes his internship as the assistant camp director of Camp St. Croix in Hudson, Wisconsin. So how about a round of applause for Aaron Ravo Lynch? The Tucker Center has a threefold mission: to conduct research on the impact of sport in the lives of girls and women, to provide first-rate educational opportunities for students, and to engage in community outreach and public service. Our Distinguished Lecture Series allows us to bring all parts of that mission together by creating a forum that allows the best and the brightest to share their insights on critical aspects of girls' and women's involvement in sport and physical activity. Tonight's presentation is no exception. We will hear the best and the brightest offerings from one of our nation's leading experts on the challenges surrounding youth sports, especially as those challenges impact young girls and their families. I speak of Professor Dan Gould from Michigan State University. Introducing Professor Gould tonight is Diane Weiss-Bjornstall, an associate professor who is a sports psychologist in the School of Kinesiology and an affiliated scholar with the Tucker Center. Professor Weiss-Bjornstall received her PhD from the University of Oregon under the supervision of another noted sports psychologist, Dr. Maureen Weiss. And for you Tucker Center trivia buffs, Professor Weiss was the very first speaker when we launched our Distinguished Lecture Series in 1995. Professor Weiss-Bjornstall is an internationally known scholar whose research focuses on the psychological and social factors that influence response to and recovery from sport injury. In 2002, she was awarded fellow status in the Association for the Advancement of Applied Sports Psychology, and she achieved certified consultant status from that same professional organization also in 2002. And I am here to tell you I have worked with Diane since 1989, and she is one of the best colleagues anyone could ever ask for. Please welcome Diane Weiss-Bjornstall.
Thank you, Mary Jo. Actually, also for you trivia buffs, I had this in there and I took it out again, but Dr. Gould is actually my academic grandfather because Dr. Weiss, that was mentioned by Dr. Kane, was his, I believe, first PhD student. And so I can claim him as my grandfather, and I love to do so. Dr. Daniel Gould is in the upper echelon of the most respected and well-recognized sports psychology professionals in the world. His persona exudes an energy and enthusiasm that are contagious. At the same time, he remains a humble and passionate advocate for sports psychology and spends his time on its application toward improving the sporting lives of children and youth. The quality and quantity of his scholarship verify the enormous influence of his work. He has authored over 100 scholarly journal publications and book chapters, has published several books, including a widely used graduate text in sport and exercise psychology, and has edited numerous works related to youth sports scholarship. To support his research, Dr. Gould has received numerous grants from a variety of sports organizations, such as the USOC, USTA, and USA Wrestling. He has been a speaker at conferences in over 20 countries around the world. Since 2004, Dr. Gould has been the director of the Institute for the Study of Youth Sports in the Department of Kinesiology at Michigan State University. The mission of this institute is to combine expertise in education and pediatric sports science to achieve the positive transformation of youth sport. Evidence of his active direction toward accomplishing this mission is found in the Institute's hosting of an upcoming National Coaching Educators Conference to be held in June, and in current research projects on such diverse issues as the role of parents in young athlete development, hazing practices in high school athletics, and aggression and character in youth soccer. In November of 2005, Dr. Gould led a national panel of youth sport experts in the release of a widely publicized youth sports national report card under the auspices of the Citizenship Through Sports Alliance. Perhaps most importantly, however, he cares about helping athletes at all levels, having worked in educational roles with everyone from our youngest, most vulnerable participants through the highest levels of Olympic competitors. Dr. Gould is a certified consultant in sports psychology, consulting over the past 25 years with varied individuals and groups, ranging from wrestlers to figure skaters, and from sailing crew members to a NASCAR pit crew. As belied by his youthful good looks, Dan Gould has influenced several generations of young sports psychology professionals through his mentoring, including over 20 of his own PhD students. On many occasions over the years, I have heard firsthand from our own graduate students their excitement with Dr. Gould's attendance at student conferences, where he listened carefully to their presentations and quietly offered them advice and encouragement for their own research. He did the same for me almost 20 years ago now, when, as a new young professor here, I was speaking at a conference down the road a piece in Mankato, Minnesota. In spite of his own obligations as a keynote speaker at that conference, he found the time to attend my talk, to listen carefully, and to give me advice and feedback that helped my future professional development. Dr. Gould continues to mentor at every opportunity, having spent most of his day here today meeting with many of our faculty and students, and as always, displaying a genuine interest in hearing about the work of others, and as always, offering helpful insights from his years of experience. Using the adage that character is best reflected by what one does when no one is looking, evidence shows me that Dr. Gould is a man of highest professional character who elevates us all through his actions, even when few would notice or know what kind deeds he has done. It is with warm affection and highest regard that I introduce to you my esteemed sports psychology colleague, and really good guy, I would add, Dr. Dan Gould of Michigan State University, as he speaks to us tonight about the professionalization of youth sports and its special impact on girls. Dr. Gould, welcome.
Good evening. Thanks for the wonderful introduction. It goes to show you should always bring your relatives to introduce you. Well, my real relatives know me, so maybe that's not such a good idea. I've heard a lot over the years about Golden Gopher hospitality, but I've never been at a place where they reupholstered the room to make it Spartan green, so I'd feel very comfortable in this. What I want to talk about tonight is the professionalization of youth sports and its special impact on girls. And when we look at this, and we look historically, a couple remarks before I get into the professionalization part. When we look at the benefits of sports for girls and women, and a report done here in 1997, and I learned today is being updated, and one recently by the Women's Sport Foundation, we know there's a lot of tremendous benefits for girls and women to participate in sport and physical activity. Just to name a few of the physical activity health benefits, anything from obesity prevention, which is a huge issue right now, to breast cancer prevention, tobacco use prevention, the psychosocial benefits, enhanced self-esteem, reduced anxiety, depression, and greater educational benefits, greater attachment to school, higher educational aspirations, just to name a few. So there's a lot of really great benefits that we want for girls and women involved in sport that have been empirically verified. We need to continue to do everything possible to facilitate the involvement of girls and women in sport and physical activity. So I want to start with that premise tonight. Right? Now, I'm going to talk about some concerns, but I don't want anybody to interpret it. I've worked a lot of my life in elite sport, and I love elite sport. I've worked in junior sport. I've worked in recreation. So I want to discuss some growing concerns today that could influence the involvement of girls in youth sports, but do it within a context that's sort of constructive criticism. There's we've come a long way. I grew up in the era of Title IX, and my friends didn't have the opportunities I had, my women friends, and now there's still a lot to be done, but there's been tremendous gains. But with those gains, I think, are coming some issues that we may need to wrestle with to try to ensure the educational benefits are maximized. So let me move on to the professionalization of youth sports and its special impact on girls. As I was preparing for this a couple weeks ago, I was at the USTA general meetings. I serve on a committee for them. And Billie Jean King received a Lifetime Achievement Award. And probably one of the people most responsible for the opportunity women in this room have in sport. And it was so interesting, they kind of chronicled their life and how she grew up in the playgrounds and wasn't supposed to be a tennis player, and a friend asked her, hey, you want to go hit? And then a local park district coach sort of adopted her and took care of her, and she really has a commitment back to kids who maybe don't have everything going their way to get involved in sport because of the change she had in her life. And as she talked, she said, well, I've had like 6 knee operations, and she says, but I still love to play. I play 3 or 4 days a week, and I just love the feel of the ball hitting the face of the racket. And I go, man, that's the way it should be. You play all those years, and you just love the activity. And then 2 days later, I'm in my office with I'll fictitiously give a name to this young athlete, Beth, who drove up from Detroit about 90 miles to see me because she's stressed out. She's 16, she's ranked 100 in the top 100 in the United States for her age group. And she's not playing well, she's not enjoying it. And I started talking to Beth, and Beth goes, well, I said, what's up? And she goes, I'm just stressed, I'm freaking out, and I got to get a college scholarship. So I started talking to her, and I said, well, so I said, well, maybe poor, you can't go to college unless you get a tennis full ride. And so then I talked to her more, and that wasn't an issue. She could afford to go to college whether she played tennis or not. And then I said, well, so we started talking, and obviously she's suffering from performance anxiety. And as we talked, I go, well, Beth, what if we sometimes it works if you do perspective taking. Worst case scenario, you don't get the scholarship to the Big Ten school you want to go to, and you go to, Central Michigan or Grand Valley State, some schools, and you play tennis, and she just couldn't conceive of that. And it was this scholarship this kid was wound up so tight, and she wasn't enjoying the game. And then I kind of go, really interesting. Billie Jean King was talking about the 70s, getting 3 hours of sleep a night, starting a women's tennis tour, and the woman's going out with knee operations and hitting for the pure joy. And I got a 16-year-old in my office, like really having major anxiety because of a scholarship that she would really like, and there's nothing wrong with going for scholarships, but it was like ruining her life. And it just dawned on me, that sort of ties as a nice introduction for this topic tonight, because we see more of this happening in sport for children and youth. And this is not an anti-scholarship talk tonight, or not an anti-elite sport, because I actually think some of these issues mess up elite sport, because now she comes in with baggage that her coach has to help her solve. So if we take this from a historical perspective, since their inception, sports for children and youth have been justified on their education and developmental objectives. If we look at the Women's Sport Foundation website, it's real clear. It's there to make better people through sport. These objectives include the laundry list you see here: health and fitness that I talked about before, desirable personal characteristics, leadership, responsibility, enhanced self-esteem. And we have evidence to show that that can be the case. While there are many excellent youth sport programs and many good things happening in youth sports, there are also some growing concerns. At the Institute for the Study of Youth Sports, we try to be a barometer of sort of what's happening around the country. What are some of the issues that could get in the way of all kids having great developmental benefits from sport? And chief among these is what I call a subtle erosion of the developmental and educational objectives and the rise of a more professionalized view. And that's what I want to talk about tonight. Now, professionalization, as I'll define it tonight, in youth sports occurs when the focus of involvement shifts from a child-youth development orientation to one where the focus is predominantly on competitive success and rewards. This professionalization is characterized by a focus on participation as a means to an end. So the example of Beth I gave you. Secondly, single sport specialization. Now, nothing wrong with specializing in a sport, but the next part is sort of a double problem. Early single sport specialization, like at 3 years old, here's your tennis racket, go to it. Intense year-round training, private coaching, increased importance placed on winning, decreased importance on educational lessons. Now, I've never heard anybody say there's actually decreased importance on educational lessons. They sort of get forgotten because the success and the outcomes just sorts of this 800-pound gorilla that keeps going. And the others sort of get forgotten. Now, My contention is over the last 30 years, American youth sports, for both boys and girls, our focus tonight is young ladies and women, have become increasingly professionalized. Professionalization has drifted downward from professional athletics to college athletics to school-sponsored sports. And I don't know if people have read the book by Bowen and Levine, and Bowen's the head of the Mellon Foundation, former president of Princeton University. And he's actually pretty pro-college sports. And he's done some studies of academics and big-time Division I programs like a Minnesota, Michigan State would have. But in this particular book, he looked at Ivy League schools that don't give athletic scholarships and Division III schools. And he looked at what he calls the academic athletic divide. And what he concluded, and it's a pretty good book, over the last 4 decades, the athletic academic divide in 33 selective and colleges and universities, which do not give scholarships. So the student body is supposed to reflect the regular students at the school, has widened. Recruited athletes are 4 times more likely to gain admission than other applicants with similar credentials. So now when we hear high school kids saying, well, I'm going to play my sport to sort of give me an edge, sort of makes some sense. The typical recruit is substantially more likely to end up in the bottom third of his or her class. And if you're a researcher, they controlled for other variables like high school GPA, SAT, ACT score. Okay? The recruited athletes underperform, do less well academically than test scores and high school grades predict. Now, what's interesting, it's not like they're flunking out or they're not passing, but it's just there's this divide that he sees. And when he looked at it further, which caught my eye, and again, this is college sport, and we're talking about youth sports tonight, but when he talked about why the athletic academic divide has increased in these universities, athletes are more disconnected from the academic community. So you're recruited, Division III, you're recruited, you come in, you're a volleyball player or you're a golfer. And that's kind of why you're going to school, all right? Sport specialization, he contends at an early age, gets these kids on this path. He says national championships rankings. Somebody in the league sort of wins. Now everybody, the ante's kind of gone up and they all need to go recruiting. Specialist coaches who are separated from the academic community. He gives an example. If I was a rowing coach at Yale, 20 years ago, I'd also teach tennis. I teach activity courses to the general student body. Now I'm sort of the women's rowing coach. And that's all I do. And I just see my athletes. And non-teacher coaches. So people who don't come from a teaching background. Now, the point I thought here, when I read this, I go, this is a pretty interesting case. And what's interesting, he is not against college sports. It may look it from this list, but he says in a lot of these schools, athletics is supposed to mirror the rest of the athletes, the rest of the student population, and he says, and this isn't occurring. And when I looked at this, and we do a lot with our Michigan High School Athletic Association, I hear them talking about all these same things, sort of at the high school. And even though we're still getting educational benefits, I'm saying, this seems to be drifting down, and this got me thinking about the professionalization. Now, I'm going to put a slide up, and I apologize. I hope it's not offending to anybody. Well, I don't hope that. It should be offending to you. It's in bad taste, and I'm going to put it up because one of my students gave it to me, and it's out of Europe. It's a soccer slide of a young boy. And to me, it epitomizes professionalization because of its bad taste. And I want to talk a little bit about that, and hopefully I don't offend anybody, but I think it has a really important message. Now, you look at it, and first you kind of chuckle. But what child of this age should be doing that? I mean, he's at a game, he's obviously modeled some behavior. He doesn't understand what he's doing, other than you're supposed to be mad at the other team. And cognitively, he can't handle that. But when I looked at it, and at first you sort of chuckle because it's sort of out of context, and then you think about it, that's pretty sick. And to me, I'm glad it's from Europe. So much for the international view, but in the sense, and tonight I'm glad it's a little boy and not a girl, but the idea of a child like this, what messages are we sending when a child kind of does these type of things when they don't really understand it. And it really said, well, maybe that's what sort of this professionalization can do if we don't keep it in check and we don't do some things about it. Sometimes I refer to this on the men's side as the Tiger Woods or Venus Williams or now Michelle Wie kind of effect. And books came out like Michelle Wie is this great golfer and her dad, so I'm going to start my daughter in golf. And don't let her try any other sports because she's going to be the next Michelle Wie. And we see that, and there's this sort of myth that we have to start early, we got to give our kids these advantages. Now, interesting, we've been doing some research with our partner, the Michigan High School Athletic Association, and focus groups on various stakeholders involved in high school sports today to try to find out what the issues are so we can address them. And we did our sample, the project is ongoing, but Michigan High School Athletic Association, sorry, I added this, there should be Coaches Association presidents, high school principals, student athletes, parents. We've got officials scheduled. So all the major stakeholders. We usually do 2 or 3 focus groups per kind of stakeholder area, and we have 6 to 8 people in a focus group. And it's interesting when we looked at, here's what we're hearing when we ask what are the biggest issues in high school sports. Increased expectations and pressure. The kids are saying there's more pressure, I'm supposed to deliver this type of thing. Overemphasized outcome focus. The state basketball championships. On one hand, they're totally exciting. But on the other hand, the kids are supposed to deliver the goods. Single and early sport specialization. In most high school athletic federations are built on the assumptions that multi-sport involvement is good for kids. And more parents are telling me, well, my best friend down in North Carolina, his daughter, well, she played basketball and volleyball, and the coach sort of subtly says, if you want to play in volleyball, you're going to have to play year-round. Drop basketball. And we're seeing more tensions like that. And it's not that people shouldn't specialize in a sport, but it's sort of the philosophy and what you're trying to do and when you do that. Inappropriate attitudes and behaviors of spectators and parents. Parents are probably the hottest issue around the country. Again, many good parents, but it only takes one sort of nutty parent. And it's to the point where we're seeing coaches now. I'll show you some data in a minute. Parents are essential for a lot of kids to keep them going in sport. And a lot of young coaches now, parents are the enemy. You mention parents and I don't want to talk to them, I don't want to deal with them. They're a pain in my rear end. And that really concerns me because they're a great resource to help a young lady and understand her and help that young woman really develop. Now, why is professionalization occurring in youth sport today, and maybe what are some of the factors influencing it? Some of the reasons we've thought about at the Institute are the marketing of elite sport orientation. And this is a product of my generation. As we get older and need glasses, or I get chronologically gifted. But what happens is we love sport. You can, Fox Sport, ESPN1, ESPN2, the Golf Channel, I can get it all over. I pick up the paper, I read it. But when you really think, I often think if I didn't go into this field and I lived in my home, my original home, Oswego, New York, and I was a plumber, I'd probably coach my son and daughter's teams. And how would I judge success as a coach? Well, I'd read the sports page and see how the teams were doing. And I'd judge it on my won and loss. Because that's sort of what society tells us. And how do I send a kid on to get a college scholarship? I must really be a good coach. So we're sort of getting these messages. Changing views of how parents define themselves. The sports sociologist Jay Coakley says, we used to always say parents live vicariously through their children. He's starting to say now that it's maybe a little more complicated than that. And what happens is how we define successful parenting has changed. And I'm a successful parent if my daughter goes to Brown. If she goes to jail, they want to send me there with her. In the old days, they'd say, wow, you're really lucky. You got a smart kid. Or bad luck. You got, somebody that's not so good. And so now we kind of have this thing that if my child gets all A's, I must be a really good parent. If my child becomes a starting point guard, I must be really good. And it's not just that I'm living through my child, but it's my worth as a parent. We've gotten studies where a young tennis player says, as she got better, her mom's friends treated the mom differently. And they said, wow, you must be doing a great job. Your daughter's winning these tournaments, doing so well. So there's a subtle kind of thing like that going on. The money involved in sports, the commercialization, fewer trained coaches at all different levels. Now, what's interesting is youth sport professionals have argued against this professionalization for a long time. And what we've usually said that winning isn't important. The trouble is nobody listens, because it is. I mean, tell an American winning doesn't count, as much as I think these other objectives, just doesn't fly really well, because I turned TV on. Or if you read the paper this morning, they probably told you the score of the games versus how many kids improved their character. I mean, the society kind of gives us this message. What drives many parents and coaches is the hope of their daughter obtaining an athletic scholarship, or athletic success, a college scholarship, or now in some cases with women, they have an opportunity to play some professional sports. With men, the professional sports is even bigger. And we hear more and more parents of daughters that come up, my daughter's going to get a college ride to Minnesota. Or, and it's sort of like, why is your kid playing sport? Because it's our ticket to not having to pay tuition. And I say this, I think college scholarships are okay. But to me, they're sort of icing on the cake versus the whole reason you're kind of focusing on playing sport. And now, some of the other things, if you've read, this book came out about 10 years ago, Joan Ryan's Little Girls in Pretty Boxes, but there's been some other studies, Donnelly in Canada, abuses of elite sport for kids, and probably if we really take professionalization out, anything from child abuse to eating disorders, excessive stress, burnout, the laundry list goes on. Probably the one we see most at all levels now is some crazy behavior by outrageous parents. We're finding in our state, they're having trouble recruiting high school officials. They do it for 3 years and they quit because it's too much trouble dealing with the parents and to a lesser extent the coaches. And a lot of young coaches it's not worth it, despite the tremendous money they make. These jokes are quite funny in Michigan. What's really interesting to me, I've been lucky enough to have a lot of involvement over the years with national governing bodies, the U.S. Olympic Committee, and they're really concerned with this issue. Because if we screw up the process, I get this woman at the elite level now in volleyball, and if she's playing for the wrong reasons, and if she has stress problems, I'm spending a lot of time on maintenance as a college coach or an Olympic coach. And the Olympic Committee talks about the pipeline. How do we start with millions of kids involved, make sure they all become sport fans, better yet, fit for life, and then the kids that are most talented kind of emerge through the system and get on the podium and help us do really well in the Olympic Games for our country. And what's so interesting is they're really worried about some of these professionalization things, that the pipeline may get messed up. I gave an example today to a reporter. It's sort of like if I do too much too soon, we burn all the fuel in the tank early, and we know the elite sport road's a long haul, and they run out of gas towards the end, or other issues. U.S. tennis, it's interesting, changed the junior ranking system a couple years ago. Why? They found out European kids played the same number of matches as outstanding U.S. juniors, but they played more competitive matches. American kids would dodge tournaments to maintain their ranking. So I could go play you and it's going to be a great game, but I dodge it because I might lose and it will affect my ranking. So they've actually changed the ranking system to reward winning more, and you're not penalized as much as losing, to try to get kids to I want to see how good I am. Let me go play the best girl out there. WTA age eligibility I'll come back to, but they put rules in tennis in about when females can play professional tennis and how much they can play prior to the age of 18. Now, the case of sports specialization I also want to mention, and the effects of specializing on the elite, the more talented young athlete, but I think it's also starting to affect other kids in the system. As the age that kids start sport participation and single sport specialization drops, what does it do to the late starters? A great example, one of my former students is a Division I college basketball coach, and they moved from one state to another, and his daughter is now, I think, 9 or 10, and she decided, and he was so excited that she wanted to play basketball. Well, she went out and went for one night, and he couldn't get her to go back. All the other kids had been playing basketball since they're 6. And she went out, she wasn't very competent and embarrassed. Luckily, they got her in track, and that's worked out for her. But it was sort of like entering, she's so far behind the other kids. And yet she's a really tall young girl who might have some potential if you could keep her there. So that's sort of an issue that we're concerned with, not just the elite kid. Now, tonight's focus, real quickly in the next 20 minutes or so, I want to examine what we know about talent development, especially in the psychological area in young athletes. Quickly talk about some myths, because I think a lot of parents are making decisions about kids in sport based on some myths and some false assumptions, and maybe outline a few implications for professional practice. So what do we know about talent development? The classic work of Bloom, where he studied athletes and actually outstanding performers in different fields, but we'll focus on the tennis and the swimming tonight, he came up with 3 phases of talent development when you look back on outstanding athletes' careers. The first phase is sort of fun and fundamentals. You go out, you try different sports, you find out you like shooting or hitting a golf ball or playing volleyball, and you kind of experiment. But what's really important there, you kind of fall in love with a sport. So Billie Jean King falls in love with tennis. Then if you're lucky and you keep going and you enjoy it, you sort of get into a second phase where you show some talent, you become more committed and involved, and you receive more specialized coaching. And then if you're learning how to train. And then if you're really lucky and talented, you work many hours and you really go for perfecting your skills. So we kind of know the stages. There's other models with 4 or 5, but this is the general kind of gist of it. I'm going to skip that slide for time, a couple slides here for time. We actually did a study kind of based on this with the role of parents in junior tennis success. U.S. Tennis was pretty interested in that issue. And we did this project in 3 phases. Phase 1, we did focus groups with 24 experienced junior tennis coaches who work with young boys and girls around the country. And on average, they had 17 years of experience, so they're a pretty experienced group. Then we did a national survey of junior tennis coaches, and we were asking the coaches about their experiences with parents in junior tennis. And then finally, in the third phase, we did a study where we looked at 8 elite players. They were all young professionals. Their parent most involved in their tennis and a coach most involved to kind of track sort of their path and what happened to them. And some of the things that came out, I just want to highlight a few of the principles. This came from the coach focus group and was verified in the other sections. Money invested in sport causes parents to expect more, sometimes unrealistically. So if I pay $2,500 a year for my kid to play tennis with lessons and everything, or swim or travel basketball or whatever, I expect a return on my investment. And what do you think I look for the return? The wins and losses. Because we don't have very clear measures of some of the educational things sometimes. Secondly, which is interesting, behind every great player is a supportive parent or an adult. And what's interesting that worries me is a lot of these young coaches don't want anything to do with the parent. Yet we know a parent, a guardian, someone is critical to bringing that young girl along. Parents often focus on short-term results and do not think about the long-term. So they want the success right now, and they'll try a sport, and if the girl isn't the best, they'll go try another one before she can really get started. And parents often discourage child from playing if the child does not have immediate success. Kind of the opposite. Some parents hear so much about pressure, they become cautious and don't push their child enough. Some of this research, we found something we call optimal push. It's sort of like pushing your kid appropriately, but not being crazy about it. Emotional reactions of parents often transfer to the child. And every player told us if they see the parent and how they're acting in the stands, it affects them. Some of them dealt with it by asking their parent not to come and watch them anymore or go hide. Different strategies. Now, all this is not doom and gloom. A lot said if done properly, tennis, or I'd contend any sport, can produce a very special positive player-parent relationship and really maximize that family environment. Now, when we did the survey, we had like 33 items the coaches rated and higher score here, and these were extent of parent-child relationship interaction problems. Overemphasis on winning, unrealistic expectations, coaches the child when the parent's not trained to be a coach. Criticizes the child were the ones that sort of jumped at the top of the list. And this was the same sort of thing, but seriousness. Higher the number, the more serious. Unrealistic expectation, pressuring the child, reacts to mistakes by yelling at the child, does not positively support the child. So we're seeing kind of these more negative issues crop up more. And again, the parents don't do this intentionally. They think they're helping the child. I'm going to get her to focus. Get your butt out there. Kind of do it or whatever. You got to pay attention. Now, what's interesting is our research with the USTA has shown that parenting process differs in each stage of the talent development process, those phases we talked about. And we also know that the coaching process differs there, and that a whole cast of individuals are going to influence this young athlete as they progress through. Interesting, I just put this up. I knew we might have some coaches, but they talk about in the early phase, this is some Dutch data, you may need one type of coaching, a little different in the second phase, a little different in the third phase. And what would be really interesting, I haven't seen this broken down by gender. You know, in general, are coaching boys different from girls? Are kids from different cultures different? And those would be some interesting questions for us to look at. Now, what makes this issue so difficult? Erickson in Florida has studied outstanding performers in a lot of fields, sports being one, and he's got this rule that's been pretty supported in the research. It takes 10 years or 10,000 hours to get really good at something and be an expert. So as a parent, I know the kid has to kick a lot of soccer balls or shoot a lot of hoops or whatever it is. And we know natural talent's also going to play a role there. But so parents sort of get wind of some of this information, so now I got to start when they're 4. Because if we really get going, I can get the edge over everybody else. And yet we know with elite athletes, we do periodization. In other words, we're trying to peak for certain events, and we plan rest, and that stuff gets forgotten. Okay, quickly on some kind of another component. We did some research on, being a champion athlete, you got to have the whole package. I'm a sports psych person, I could say mental, but you need the whole deal. Give me somebody with good vertical jump, great technical skills, have their psychological house in order, you're going to have a champion. Now, just to look at the mental skills here, we did a study several years ago where we looked at Olympic champions and kind of retrospectively went back and traced their development. And we looked at 10 current former Olympic champions. We joked in our lab that to get in the study, you had to have like 2 gold medals. So, we went and got consistent performers, men and women, that nobody would doubt that they were champions. And then they represented 9 different sports, 4 females, 6 males, and that was a result. We wanted to get 5 and 5, but it was somewhat a result of who we knew and availability, and it's hard to get people of that notoriety sometimes. Then we interviewed the significant others, usually a parent, a couple other cases, a sibling or spouse, most involved in their athletics, and some coaches that they identified that really knew them throughout their career. Now, we found a pretty typical laundry list if you know the sports psychological literature. Here's what you need to be really good. If there's some coaches, I know we had an assistant athletic, this is who you want to recruit. One, they better be good physically, but they got this whole package. Right? What we did in this study, which was interesting, is we kind of explored retrospectively, it's not a perfect study, but how they got these. How did they develop these attributes? And some of the things we identified, families clearly supported and encouraged participation, but exerted little pressure to win. Now, as the kids got in the middle years, they knew it was important. They had an investment sometimes, but it wasn't this constantly over them. You got to practice, you got to win. They give them a little push once in a while, but it wasn't nutty. Secondly, parents treated the child like other siblings. There was some data to show the athletic child gets more attention. We didn't find that. Families emphasized a belief in the child's ability to succeed or a can-do, optimistic attitude. Remember one person said, no matter what happened, my dad always said, I can do it. This gal, the woman talked about, he said, I could do it. I won the Olympic gold medal. He's always optimistic. I lost a big event, same thing. If you're going to do it right, kind of what I call a core value. They had early exposure and contact with high-level competitors that inspired them and provided various forms of vicarious learning, which I think women's sport does an especially good job of that, of giving back, at least up to now with the stage of development. Most had early success and showed some signs of talent, and the families were critical in just a lot of logistics, transport, support. Families emphasized and modeled the hard work ethic and discipline. Families did not view sport as the child's entire life. They kept things in perspective. Siblings often played a major role in the athlete's psychological development, either as a training partner or a model. So when we put all this together, it didn't seem like this, pressuring and on the young person's case all the time was really the way to go. And just some quotes, maybe, I'll skip some of these, but to go through. This woman is talking about, if the children made a commitment, or this is a parent, if the children made a commitment, I would expect them to follow through. I would tell them, you don't have to do it. You don't have to sign up for it. So they really meant that. That is your choice. You're free to make a choice. Once you do make the choice, then you must commit to it. So I did expect them to follow through. So they do this every year. So it wasn't like when you were 6, the parent asked you if you wanted to do it, and then it's 18 and nobody's asked you again. They kind of followed through on it. This one is sort of about a parent being even-keeled. This Olympian is talking about her father, I think. I never felt like if I won a competition, they were overly excited. They were like, that was good. They said that even when I didn't perform well. I knew that they were proud of me, but I knew they were proud of me whether I won or lost. So kind of while this optimism comes through, they're encouraging with it. This is my favorite, and I'll skip a few quotes after this, but this woman was a darling of her Olympics. She was like 16 or 17, won a slew of gold medals. And she got home. My mom was like, I don't care if you won X gold medals. You still have to do your chores and clean your room in a way that kept me humble. She's going back. So it was like, okay, you won the gold medal, go take the garbage out. Versus, oh, you're special, walk on water for us now. So the conclusions from this study is families played a critical role in the psychological development of champions. Most champions and their families' initial goals were not focused on developing athletic prowess. Rather, they focused on fun and personal development. And then what I call core values. They participated in multiple sports, kind of pursued an active lifestyle. The primary focus of parents and coaches was on long-term development, emphasizing core values and disciplined involvement versus winning and short-term results. The early sport experience of these champions was similar to what experts propose for all children: fun and fundamentals and quality coaching. So I thought this research is important because I think people are making a lot of assumptions about what you need to produce a champion that some of them don't seem to be borne out by the research we've conducted. So real quickly, some myths surrounding development of champions. And remember I said before, we usually go out and tell people winning isn't important. I still think we need to say there's other objectives and they're all important. Hey, I like to win. Part of being a competitor is trying to win, but it doesn't supersede all the others. Development, fun, learning things. And secondly, don't fall into the trap of some of these myths. Athletic talent can be accurately predicted at a young age. There are some phenoms out there that seem to, from day one all the way through. But the research tends to show a lot of them that are good early are early matures, and they're not so good later on, and you get late bloomers. More is always better. Well, we're playing school ball, and then we'll go to another practice, and then I'll have you lift weights on the way home. And then you wonder why your daughter's in the orthopedic surgeon with an overuse injury. Stages of talent development can be skipped. One of the things we see is people trying to jump over the first stage. If a kid's really going to do those 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, and really, they're going to need some self-motivation. they're going to need to love it. And you need to help them find one that they love, and maybe they have some talent with it if they're really going to persist. The earlier we start, the bigger advantage we have. This is a tricky one, because the earlier you start, short term you do have an advantage. But long term, you might not get a fundamental motor base that could help you later on. You might use too much of the fuel in your tank. So it's tricky, because the parent will see short term I can get the advantage, but long term they may not. We're going to get a scholarship. I never tell a kid they shouldn't go for a scholarship. But there's been statistics out. If you really want to get a scholarship, I read one the other day, you have a 30-time better chance going to the library. I mean, because there's more of them. And you'll hear parents, well, I'm paying $5,000 a year for my daughter to do it, so that's going to be her college scholarship. I said, why don't you hire a tutor and let her, and not that they shouldn't pursue athletics with talent, but you just end up putting all this pressure on. Early single sport specialization is essential. It's tricky now because so many people are doing it. It's starting to look that way, but a lot of the older literature shows a lot of pro athletes played a lot of multiple sports, and there's some physical reasons and psychological for that. You cannot have fun if you're going to be good. What's really interesting, I've been to the Olympic Games, and a lot of what you do at the Olympics is eliminate distractions and try to keep it loose but focused. I often view people that, if you knew you were going to, I put $1 million here on the floor and said you can have it if you don't think about it for the next 20 minutes. That's what it's like in the Olympics. Just don't think about it. You can win the NCAA, just go for it. And how do we loosen them up? And it's weird because it's not all loose and fun, because it's serious in some hands, but they have to have this fun. And a lot of times you work with them on how to be serious and have fun at the same time. Talented individuals need different entry programs and coaching approaches than their less talented counterparts. Some of the data shows us that they don't. We need all kids to start in these fun and fundamentals type programs. Okay, my last 5 minutes, I'm going to skip a few slides here because I want to make sure we leave plenty of time for questions. That was a request. One more that's really important. There are no costs associated with talent development. There are costs. If your kid's going to be a national merit scholar, they're going to give up some things. If your kid's going to be the first chair in the Minneapolis Symphony, they're going to give up some things. If your kid's going to be the starting point guard for the University of Minnesota, they're going to give up some things. They're going to get some gains. And I think parents need to kind of go in and weigh the cost and benefits for the family, for the child. What do we want to do? And sometimes I think they go in sort of blind on that. Okay, some implications for professional practice. We must help leagues and programs develop philosophies relative to the role of talent development in their programs. How do you handle that? What's the best perspective? Inform, educate parents and coaches about the stages of talent development and the role of psychological factors in there. Help develop effective sport parents. Provide educational programs. I know you're doing some work here. We're doing the same at our institute. Assist in programmatic efforts to make youth sports better. This comes out of England and tennis, but remember when I talked about the stages of talent development? They've put posters together that they put in the clubs to sort of educate the parents. And they'll have the space between 6 and 16 player development. These would just be some principles. We've already covered those, but this is important. Fundamentals, with fun being emphasized, learning to train, learning to compete, training to win. Trying to get the parent to see there's a progression and you can't be skipping over the stages. And then they give further details with specifics about how much they should play and the way they should approach it. Another real interesting one, again, it comes from tennis. I just was involved in this. Develop policies and programs that protect the health of the elite young athlete. The Women's Tennis Association has done this with their Age Eligibility Commission. 10, 15 years ago, they were under a lot of pressure, burning kids out. Remember Jennifer Capriati, all sorts of that. And they kind of addressed it. Hats off. I haven't seen any men's program do this as well as the WTA has. 95, they evoked an age eligibility rule, limiting professional play for girls 10 and under, 18 and under. Pretty controversial at the time. They simultaneously started education programs for parents, talking about careers to a lot of the girls were quitting school and going on tour. In 2003, the WTA formed an independent age eligibility panel and just went back and looked at the 10 years to evaluate their rule. That's impressive. They went back and did an evaluation. And Otis and Martin have published that report a year ago. And they surveyed a ton of people, current players, agents, sports scientists, had like oral testimonies, had a statistical analysis of player career data, looked at the sports science tennis literature. It's a pretty impressive project. Since the age eligibility rule was established in 1995, some of the results showed premature retirements dropped from 7 to 1%. So like 30 players less are playing now. Only one retired what they thought at a very young age. Careers are lasting 24% longer, controlling for some other variables. So they found quite a few kind of neat things. Their conclusions: the amount and level of professional play by girls under 18 should be limited to protect players from burnout and to allow time to handle the demands of professional play. Interesting, when they did this 10-year assessment, they added a few more tournaments. They thought the girls could add a few more at different ages. The amount and level of allowable play should gradually increase year to year in a phase-in approach. So when you're 14, you forget what it is, you can play like 7 tournaments. And when you're 16, it's 11. And I just got involved with this with them. They do an educational and mentoring program where a young player under 18 gets a former retired player that mentors her and brings her along. And they bring security people in, financial people, and they call it Pro-U. The girls have to go to like this 2-day session, mandatory if you're going to play tournaments, to kind of bring them up to speed, to protect them. Hats off to the WTA. It's not a perfect program, but boy, they're stepping out. I haven't seen anybody else that deals with such young kids trying to do the right thing and still maintain their product. Professional tennis is supposed to make money and entertain. Summary and conclusions, so we'll have time for questions because I don't want the boss to yank me. And she will. She's pretty tough looking. The students all know what I mean. Summary and conclusion. We must work hard to combat the threat of professionalization of youth sports. Again, youth sports are great. We need to encourage kids. We need it more than ever. But we need to start addressing these issues. Take the WTA. A lot of sport organizations hide from things like burnout. They went and got information and attacked it and came up with something better. We have learned a good deal about talent development in young athletes, and we need to better inform sport parents, coaches. We must use this information to eliminate myths surrounding the role of youth sports in the development of champions, and we must begin to educate coaches and parents relative to talent development issues in sport. And maybe before I conclude, the scholarships that it really taught me tonight. It's hard for me, but a number of years ago, I have 2 sons now. My daughter died when she was very young, and I went through some soul searching. And, I go like, maybe I should have been in medicine. I'm a sport guy. I do sports psych. And then I didn't have a picture with me today, but I had a picture of her. She was only like a toddler, 21 months. But my wife was a physical educator. We spent more time in the pool and running in leaves in the backyard. And after I went through, we all know what hell is when you have a kid die. It's hell, and you never get over it. But I looked at these pictures of my daughter, and I finally kind of came to terms with it. And that kid had a great 21 months, and a lot of it was for physical activity. And what we need to do is, it's a great time to give girls opportunities. They have them. But it's not just about the success. Success is great and striving to it, and we don't want to tell them not to, but boy, enjoying the ride. And it really struck me with my daughter, my business is to help people enjoy the ride. How do we help kids learn through sport, enjoy? And maybe we need to step back. And sometimes when you have an awful tragedy like that, it really makes you think. And if we could help every young girl in America get physically active, enjoy the ride. Some of them that got talent become Olympic champions. Some of them learn a lot by failing. But they all sort of fall in love with physical activity. That's what it's about. And hopefully the spirit of this maybe ties into that. What's your role? What can you do to help that process along? So let me stop there. Thank you. I know I went a little over, but I had the podium and I had green chairs. And I think questions, or did you? Boy, I'm in charge. That's a scary thought. Questions or comments or reactions? And
First, thank you.
oh. Well, I hypnotized them. Oh, one person awoke.
One of the things that I was interested not to hear you talk about was
Wait for the microphone, please.
Oh, you're in trouble now. One of the things that I was surprised not to hear you mention in terms of professionalism was the impact of steroid use and the Barry Bonds effect.
Yep.
Not to beat a dead horse with the news and all that, but in your research, have you found truly creeping down to the college and high school level, and have you seen any trends in terms of, the gender impact or any differences between the gender?
I'm not an expert on performance enhancement substances. Two things we hear at the high school level. It's an issue, especially in some male sports, football, some of those. But the bigger issue we're hearing more about is alcohol, that everybody kind of just pretends isn't there for boys and girls, and that's a big one. Maybe recreational drugs like marijuana that maybe need to be addressed. I think on the women's side, I think steroids a big one. The other one we hear a lot now is nutritional supplements. I've run into parents. We did a thing for at our women's state basketball championships for middle schoolers. They have like a camp, and then we talk to the parents. And just some of the parents well, I got my daughter, she's 8, on the Atkins diet. And another one, I'm giving her some Red Bull before the game to give them that little, and I'm just like, so there's a lot of misinformation about nutrition. Mine is, we do need to deal with the steroid problem, probably not as much from what I've read in women's. I mean, eating disorders might be a bigger one, and the female triad and some things like that. But I more worry about alcohol and recreation from a scale issue and recreational drugs. Oh, wait time, it always works.
Hi, I was very interested in your talk about WTA's age eligibility. And because I've been playing tennis in the last 6-7 years, and I became really serious, and I've been watching lots of professional players in tournaments. So could you tell me a little bit more how or why only WTA started this sort of, I'm not limiting.
They started it because 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot of concern with young girls going on the tour. Not a lot of supervision. They're kind of thrown into a full professional tour at 13, 14. Some of it was publicity, but kids. The Capriati case is a good one. Signed a big contract too much too soon. Sort of like experimented with marijuana. They sort of blame that on the tennis, although a lot of kids sort of do that. I'm not brushing it over, but there was some bad press involved. But I think it was a genuine concern that they have minors playing a professional sport, and should they be going around the world on a full schedule, and is that in the best health and safety of the child? So they were really concerned about some overzealous parents and coaches taking these kids on the road, not being supervised as much, and really the negative effects. So they put this commission together to say, well, we don't have all the data, but what's reasonable? It was controversial, and they limited. You just couldn't play a full professional tournament schedule at 14. And 15, you had to phase into it. And now they went back and evaluated it, and they found some pretty powerful results. Not from a strict science cause and effect, but for a governing body. I wish our government would go back and analyze the programs, that. So I think it was a genuine concern for the health and safety of the players. Also, but if you're a corporation, the U.S. Olympic Committee has to win gold medals to get corporate donations. And if you're burning out your best young kids, or they're coming up with overuse injuries, your product from a corporate point of view is in trouble. So the more you can have a great system where kids are getting the skills, learning to be fiery competitors, but not going crazy and getting all these other negative effects with it, that's what you want. Hopefully that was complete enough. Jonathan, you got the microphone. You're the power man.
Did you find any differences in the development of girls between individual sports and team sports, or was it the same pattern as it went along?
We didn't look at it in enough depth to have it. So I don't know of any studies that have sort of looked at that. The talent stuff has looked more at individual sports. I know there's some literature, it's incomplete literature, some youth sport literature that shows there's more stress sometimes in individual than team sports. I mean, obviously some team functioning stuff. It's probably a really important question, but I don't know of anybody that's really looked at it. I don't know if anybody from the Tucker Center, I don't think I've seen anything on a comparison like that. I think high school sports is sort of built on the assumption that one of the values of playing multi-sport is you play on a team and then you might be in an individual sport and gain some different, you're responsible, your performance is dependent on your teammates. And you learn to get along with other people. Others, more individual achievement, plus exposure. But I don't know of any data on it, unfortunately. Great question. Maybe we'll study it.
I coach a running group for girls ages 3rd through 5th grade, and it's an international program called Girls on the Run. And I'm interested in if you have any data or research showing if some of these problems are gender related, where males are coaching female athletes versus females coaching females.
We were just talking about that this morning. We really need some data on that. I haven't seen any data. I mean, in a lot of the sports, it's hard enough to find. It's one of our biggest issues. We need more females coaching. And we need to make the sport world more receptive to female coaches. For example, those female coaches who tend to have children, why can't we figure out a way to accommodate with sort of sitters on the side and make it happen? I mean, we need a lot more female coaches, but I haven't seen too many comparisons. I know one thing we hear around the country, but a lot of people talking about is like soccer injuries with the knee. There's a higher ACL incidence in females than males, and there's a group at North Carolina Greensboro studying it, and they think it could be hormonal, could be muscle imbalances, it could be females sort of get the male training programs watered down versus a training program that's specific for their body type and things of that nature. So the more where specialists are kind of designing programs for women versus kind of taking the male. But again, I'll ask the experts here, any data that you know of that? You're supposed to have all the answers. You told me I'm the pretty face. And they also said they never told a lie in their life, so I don't know how.
Well, just one thing I would say, Dan, I don't have research on this, but I find it really intriguing in my classes, and I'd be interested if you hear this too, Dan, on the numbers of female athletes that say that they prefer male coaches. And I think part of it is that they haven't had much experience with females, as you point out, but B, it's something, I'm not really a feminist, as my colleagues will tell you, but in some way I still think there's this sense that the girls will take things, kind of your question, take treatment from male coaches, push themselves harder, do more dangerous things, frankly, than they would for a female coach. And I see you nodding your head, so you've maybe observed that, but I have no data to back that up. And I'd be curious, Dan, if you hear that.
Yes, we hear it. And there's some old data that was lab data on cross-gender effects and reinforcement. A reinforcer coming from the opposite sex would be more powerful. I think a question that we should be asking too, why don't we have more females coaching males? I think females bring empathy and a whole different thing to the table. My last 2 university presidents have been females, and I think they're better than the guys I had. Like, why do we, because we always ask the question, because there's a shortage. There's more male coaches in the female sports world. But I think my sons could have really benefited from having some female coaches. And it's anecdotal, I know, but growing up, my PhD students, I paid them, but they used to sit them. And I remember Susie Tuffy, who was an NCAA All-American in track, wouldn't let them win. And I thought it was good. When they're 6, that their babysitter is beating them out front. And I think they need to learn that it's not, because they come home with all boys, all these crazy gender-related notions. And, your parents tell them, but I think seeing women models, so I think we want to think both ways. But one, the male coaches we have, I think the best ones listen and are better at understanding the young women. And they don't coach them like men. They'll tell you that. There's some, whenever you coach, there's some universals. But if you talk to some of the really good ones, they individualize and they've learned certain things. The problems I've seen is, we see it in tennis. We coach everybody like junior boys. I give them the appeal to their manhood talk, except they're little girls. It's, because I was a guy. So ones that sensitize more to individual differences and commonality. We had a long discussion about this today, about looking at gender differences in coaching without getting accused of, being radical one way or the other, but legitimately, how much is there? And a lot of researchers that have looked at it say there's more differences within a gender than between. And so that's another thing to keep in mind. Yes, sir.
I just have one comment. I work with a local city in youth sports. So we're developing our list of values, core values, and our relationships with our associations. And as I think about your talk tonight, the hardest thing we have to do today, and I agree with you some, is to find ways to educate parents on how kids develop in sports.
Yep.
Because the hardest thing we have in our community is that kids are singled out, girls or boys, at a very young age as the elite athletes. And hey, even though some of those elite athletes, as you've discussed, peak early, they remain the elite athletes, and the late bloomers don't always have a chance. So some of the debates we've had in our local community lately have been trying to find a good balance on how to continue to develop the fundamentals and the training techniques of those youths, both in girls, especially in girls this last year in our community, and how to do that. And yet, it is a very hard sell with the parents, because when you try to set those core values that you're discussing, I think tonight they're important, and I would agree with you, then you find you have a real quandrum in that you have volunteer parents that head up associations. And there's a fine line that you have to draw between wanting to keep those parents involved and putting too much policies or procedures, if I can say, on them, or guidelines that you want them to follow, and lose them, because the biggest asset we have are our parents in our communities. And yet we need to train them, and when we push to train them, the funny thing I find in the last 10 years doing this is then we get threatened that, well, I'm going to quit and we'll disband our association because we don't want you to do that. So my response lately has been, as my director of Park and Rec knows next to me, is fine, then maybe we should quit and have new leadership, and that's okay for now. But it's a hard sell, and there's a hard balance there.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's the real world is is difficult, and you're trying to make gains. But one thing, sometimes I don't think we've done enough, and it depends if you're a public or nonprofit or whatever. But sometimes we've been so concerned to, and this is going to sound harsh, but if the kids won't have a program. If the program's not going to be good, maybe they shouldn't have it. And maybe, I know some directors that I was telling some folks today run a nonprofit in Detroit, Think Detroit PAL, for 13,000 kids, and they're desperate for volunteers. And Dan Varner, the CEO, first thing he says is, thank you for coming, thank you for volunteer. Here's our core values. If you can't buy into them, leave now. We don't need you, we'll have less teams. And he just doesn't pull any punches. And I think one reason they're good, and I was going to compliment you, a lot of leagues don't go. You're talking about core values. There was a social philosopher, Marcuse, said we all have answers to the questions, we just don't ask the question enough. In a lot of youth sports, we sort of do it because that's what everybody else does. Jack Roberts, the head of the Michigan High School Athletic Association, was getting a lot of pressure from some of the coaching groups. year-round basketball. Everybody's doing it. We got to start playing in the summer. And he goes, no, we're not going to. We're going to offer a different product. They can offer League B, and we believe in multi-sport, and that's the way it's going to be. I mean, he obviously consulted, but the idea that our values are different, and just because everybody else is doing it doesn't mean we need to. And I know that politically is tough to do, and all of us have to find a line that we draw in the sand, and we've got to be a political realist. But we need to do more of that, I think.
And I think, though, also, as I look back to my own youth experiences, the same political issues are there today that were there in the 70s and the 60s when I grew up. It's just like they just recycle in a different way.
Yep.
Sports has professionalized more, no doubt about it. There's more money in sports. Parents are more interested in sports than they were when maybe we grew up. But the political issues have not changed that I see.
No, and maybe we need to train each other, and we were talking about social policy today, and I'm trying to figure out how to implement nationwide education policy. No one ever taught me that in my graduate training. How do we get government to do things? How do we get people? If you look at the implications of Title IX, man, it had big changes. No child left behind. You may not like it, but boy, it's made changes. And how do we maybe get policies like that? I'm naive politically, but I think we need to maybe think more about that, child protection, other types of things. Yes, sir.
I thought I heard in your introduction you're involved in the Youth Sports Report Card
Yep.
initiative. Could you give us a little insight on where that's headed?
Yeah, the Youth Sport Report Card, I think there were some out front I saw. That was the Citizenship Through Sport Alliance. Was a group put together from a lot of major sport organizations because they were worried about the decline of character education and educational values like being a good sport, those type of things. And they're trying to figure out how could they have nationwide implications. So they put we don't have research on all this, but a team of experts together, invited a panel in and said, well, maybe if we had a national report card on youth sports, and the idea that how are we doing with officials, with parents, with coaching education and different criteria. So the panel, which I was a member of, part of 30 people, and we what were the 4 or 5 big grading areas, and that's what's reflected. And then the idea was sort of to be a tough grader and come up with national, how are we doing? Like coaching education, we stink compared to most countries. So we didn't get a very good grade. Parents were an issue. Officials were doing a little better. But it was hoped that we get CTSA, I was just a member, would get like some national publicity for that. And then they have kits where you'd have a board in your local rec and park or your nonprofit grade yourself. And with the idea that every year a grade would come out sort of nationally, but then get you to look in the looking glass, kind of reflect, have a panel maybe grade yourself. And hopefully that would spur improvement. And one of the ideas is, other than one loss, we don't get much performance feedback in sport. So it was trying to look at other areas. They're actually coming out something this month, again, with the National Rec and Parks. I haven't been involved in that. And I was just involved with this, and then they asked me to go to be the spokesperson. And it sounded really good till I had to read the failing grades out. So that wasn't so good.
Question?
The boss asked the question.
I have a question. I often tell my students who ask me about Title IX that I think the good news about Title IX is that young girls today grow up with a sense of entitlement. And the bad news about Title IX is that young girls today and their parents increasingly grow up with a sense of entitlement. Do you feel like, especially at the intercollegiate level in sports like women's basketball, that we are at a tipping point?
It's a great question. I don't know if we're at the tipping point, but we're getting closer. And I mean, opinion here, and I'm not sure. I think women's sport, my experience is the women athletes have wanted to get back so you don't have much. You're not the big stars on campus historically, so you want to give back, like the Billie Jean King. And now young girls are growing up with closer to what the boys have had. And is there a point where they sort of get spoiled and don't want to come back and they're entitled? And I think that's on the boys men's side an issue. And I think it's getting closer on the women's side and the girls' side. And I think it's something we need. How do we kind of build in sort of that humanity? as a product of an observer, I remember in college wrestling, this was pre-Title IX, I was a wrestler in college, and I was a Division III program, and the field hockey or lacrosse team would play, and they had teams back then, not, it was a little different, but then they'd get together after the game and sort of have this social. And I always thought that was kind of neat. But now we don't do it. Why? Because some people have criticized, have we gone so far in looking for equality because the men's program had better facilities and more money? Have we adopted the male model and not taken a look at part of the male model may be screwed up? And maybe the women's side could bring some different things to the table. And it's the women's side probably has some issues too. I mean, but the idea that, men and women together, sort of like a government, you bring all your resources together, you get some better leaders on each side, and you get a better mix. And I worry sometimes that sort of the entitlement might be coming. Sometimes we were talking about this afternoon, you look at some of our top women coaches, and are they sort of like male clones? Or are they bringing something different to the table to make sport better? I guess I'd throw that. I don't know the answer to that. It's sort of a provocative question. But, and I'm maybe sort of different for, this is going to sound weird, for a guy. My dad died when I was young. My mom always had the better job, her own business. She raised me. And women to me, like in a power position, weren't sort of, I thought that was normal. Mom was like that. And, other guys didn't. But I just think that side of they bring interesting things to the table. And how do we kind of go with the equal facilities and other things and maybe bring some different perspectives? Now, I don't know what those perspectives are. Maybe I know enough to be dangerous, but I get to go back to Michigan, so I don't have to live with the pot I stir up here. Although I like the nice green room. Spartan green. Jokes are really funny in Michigan. I guess in Minnesota they don't have a sense of humor. Or maybe they do. Oh, somebody up back.
I was really interested in your concept about the pipeline and just wondering about if anybody's looking at what's happening in, public school systems where the investment not only in sports but in music programs and that whole range of what is now being called extracurricular activities rather than core activities to education, and looking at what that's going to be doing down the line.
Yeah, I didn't mention this, but in some of our focus groups with the stakeholders in high school, a couple things have come up. Michigan's has been especially hurt because of the auto economy. Our unemployment's like sort of the highest in the nation. And our schools are suffering because of it, the economy. And we've got more pay for play. And in Michigan high school, they don't have scientific data, but they have some informal. It wouldn't hold up to scientific scrutiny, but they do survey data. They've got some data to show when you implement pay to play, even though for poor kids they can get scholarshiped in, they're finding numbers go down. They're finding when you implement, and if public education, where extracurriculars are thought to be beneficial for everybody, the poor districts may be suffering more because of that. That's one. And the other thing we picked up, what's really interesting from some of our coaches, some of them said, I'm having to go out and raise money for uniforms, and I don't get as much time to coach. And one of them said, maybe we need to be like colleges and hire a developmental specialist for the high school to go out and raise funds, because they're having to do it. So I think there's some effects like that occurring, and we picked up some things like that. The other thing we picked up, athletic directors. The 50-year-old, 58-year-old athletic director with 35 years of experience is retiring, and they're replacing them with a part-time person. So there's, and that isn't necessarily trained, so there's some big issues like that that are a concern. Can we do two? We had two hands up, because I'm equitable guy.
Did you get anything from your focus groups about the change in sports seasons and how that might affect the high school students? In
Michigan?
Yes.
No, but that's, if you're not familiar with that, the Michigan High School Athletic Association is in a lawsuit right now, and it gets kind of labeled a Title IX lawsuit because the girls' basketball season doesn't line up with most of the rest of the country. And the headline of that, and I'm not here to defend the MHSAA, and we do a lot of work with them, but it's not like the old boys trying to hold the girls down. Their rationale for it is Michigan produces more scholarship players per size than other states. They're afraid if they move the girls' season comparable to the boys, it's going to cause all sorts of facility problems, and they think they'll draw less and have less attention. And they're going to take it to the Supreme Court. Their other argument is the parents that sued, and again, I'm only giving you pieces, so I'm not an expert, but the parents that sued did so because it was hurting the daughter's chance of getting college scholarships. There was their contention. And the High School Athletic Association says, we're not in the business of helping people get college scholarships. We're in the business of educating high school students. So that court case sort of gets labeled Title IX, and again, there's two sides to it. So I'd encourage you to read both sides. But the part I hear from MHSAA is sort of, there's another side that deals with, they think keeping the seasons the way they are beneficial to the girls in Michigan. And they're willing to go to the Supreme Court with it, where it will probably end up. So it's an interesting case to follow. And I think the last question up here, softball.
Hi. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on like girls playing on boys hockey team or on sports teams, and or having youth programs maybe being more co-ed or something, just to be integrated more.
Yeah, it's a good question. In fact, we had a focus group with scholar athletes last week, and it's hard. And I remember a young boy talking about it, a high school boy, and he was saying, it's on one hand he thought it was good because the girls felt, they need the same opportunities. But on the other hand, he was going, for the boy, you only can lose, because of some of the social pressures and other kind of things. If there's not an opportunity, I think by obligation we need to provide it. It can be really hard sometimes. Hockey's kind of nice. I think it's best when we provide, I don't want to say separate but equal, because I don't mean it that way, but wrestling, for example. Now they have international wrestling for females and males. And I think that's a better situation because you can get more females having competition with other females than you can when you match them up with males because of size differences and other type of things. But if there's not that opportunity, I think giving them the opportunity makes some sense. I don't know if we have some expert opinion here on that, or. Yeah, it's very complicated, and I've obviously showed it. I don't understand it, so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gould, for an excellent and informative presentation. Please join us for refreshments in the lobby and take a chance to say hello on a personal level to Dr. Gould. Thank you for coming.